Preparing.
Can you please stop the clicking?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. This is Aiden Hill, candidate for Berkeley Mayor this 2020 election. I'm here with Ali Rodriguez as well as Peter Hess, and we were here to talk about a disaster preparedness webinar. And so why we're here today is we're at a moment in history.
Aiden?
Yes?
Can I let everybody in?
Yes, you can let everybody in.
And 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. People are just joining us right now. We were saying that we're here today to talk about a disaster preparedness webinar. And why are we doing this right now? We're at a moment in history where each political as well as environmental decision we make will affect the rest of our collective community. As humans, we have the ability to protect our commons, the land, the sea, the air. We also have the ability for great chaos, such as nuclear weapons, land degradation, and the stain of poverty that denies basic human rights. True equity is out of reach for too many people in the city of Berkeley. Climate change, coronavirus, and digital misinformation continue to divide us. Families sacrifice their peace of mind to meet basic needs, and many residents have fallen through our social safety net, relying on mutual aid to get by. Our leaders, now more than ever, must be willing to fight for future generations. I'm here today with two leaders, Ali Rodriguez and Peter Hess, who are going to talk in depth about the situation that's happening in Berkeley. And so let's start with an introduction from Ali Rodriguez.
Hello, beautiful and wonderful Berkeley neighbors. My name is Alexandria Rodriguez, but I love to go by Ali. I am a mother of 3 children, and I am a huge fanatic of emergency preparedness as well as wildfire preparedness. Here in Berkeley, I am a resident of District 6.
Thank you, Ali and Alexandra. Next, we'll talk about Peter M.J. Hess, a PhD. Peter M.J. Hess is a Roman Catholic scholar of sustainability as viewed through the lens of science, religion, and ethics. In addition to his academic training, he has 60 years experience of living with wildfire risks in Cobb Mountain, Lake County, and California, which he lives half-time in Berkeley. He and his family have lost 3 homes to wildfires since 1962. And Peter now helps teach people how to live more safely in the wildlands urban interface. He is working towards his Wildland Firefighter Grade 2 qualification and is a chapter member of the New Lake County Prescribed Burning Association, or PBA. Peter has served as an international director for the Center of Theology and the Natural Sciences in Berkeley, California, and Director of Outreach to Religious Communities with the National Center for Science Education in Oakland, California. He has taught at 4 universities and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He earned a master's in philosophy and theology from Oxford University and a PhD in history theology from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He is co-author of Catholicism in Science and numerous articles on issues in sustainability. He is currently editing an international collection of essays on climate disruption, and his scholarly focus is on religious and ethical implications of resources and human overpopulation. Lastly, he's a fellow of the International Society for Science and Religion and a mountaineer. Peter and his wife Vivian have 2 sons, Michael and Robert. Without further ado, let's have an introduction from Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aiden and Ali. Let me say a few words and then I'll turn on the share screen. So I first met Aiden and Paul and Ali at an amazing event at Indian Rock Park back in June when there had been a very racist incident and about 300 neighbors decided to hold a vigil. And Aiden spoke and I was just amazed to hear what you were saying, and then amazed and delighted with my wife and son, Robert, to speak with you and Paul. And then I met the dynamic Ms. Alley, and we just began communicating through various media about our shared interest in wildfire preparedness in the Berkeley context. So it's just been wonderful to get to know you and to follow your campaign and to have aspirations for your future. Now, I'll go ahead and start sharing screen. So let's see, I click on share screen, do I? And on my presentation. And let's see, this should get the slideshow going. All right, so is that working?
You're good to
Okay.
go, Peter.
All right. So I was thinking about the title since I've given this in a variety of contexts, ranging from Chico State University, where I go every year to a wonderful conference on sustainability, to local groups here in the countryside and a community emergency response team group in Berkeley. And I thought I would pick out the major elements that are relevant to Berkeley from all of these presentations. So that's why I'm calling it Berkeley Citizens Preparing for Wildfire Risk. I didn't want to say prepared because we're not there yet, or at least we're not where we should be, but lots of people are doing lots of amazing things, and we're far better off than we might have been many years ago. Since conferences are short, I'm going to give you my email, petermjhess@gmail.com. I love carrying on conversations with attendees at conferences or Zoom meetings to dig into issues that we don't have time for during the presentation. This is a photograph I took in 2015 as I was fleeing a massive wildfire that had just burned two of our homes. And by the way, Aidan, it's actually 4 homes in 3 wildfires, not 3 homes. So it's been a pretty long saga. This is a 3-mile long phalanx of flames, and I snapped a photo of it just as I was leaving. That's the Valley Fire that took out Cobb Mountain, Middletown, Anderson Springs, and Hidden Valley Lake in 2015. And it was really the first of an unmitigated series of fires that we've had ever since then, ushering in a new awareness about wildfire in climate change. So why should Berkeley citizens take an interest in wildfire? Isn't that just a rural problem? Well, if you were or weren't paying attention to the news yesterday, Tuesday, there was a big fire in Oakland that took out 2 homes, burned them to the ground. And here's the report from KTVU. Residents turning to generators during PG&E public safety power shutdowns, PSPSs, for wildfire safety. That very equipment can spark a wildfire, and it did, and it was a tragedy yesterday. You know, it's going to be happening a lot more. We worry about that in Lake County. So let me give you my personal odyssey about fire. My wife and I have 2 sons. This is taken at Michael's graduation from UCLA in 2018. And Robert, the night before, had graduated from Berkeley High. And we made the insane choice to leave the Berkeley High graduation after a Barney's dinner at 10 o'clock. And we drove from 11 at night until 7 in the morning to get to Michael's graduation at 8 a.m. in Los Angeles. And our sons are both our hope and our anxiety in an age of mind-numbingly rapid acceleration of global climate change. We fear for them, we're concerned for them, but we're also amazed at the interests and contributions their generation are making, your generation, to addressing some of these accelerating issues. Robert is he's now a junior at UCLA, a rower, film actor, and helper when I was confronting a wildfire siege a few years ago. Fire, of course, is deeply ingrained in the human past, from the burning of Rome in 410. This is not a photo, by the way. This is an artist's reconstruction. to the London Fire of 1666, a major urban fire, to the Berkeley Fire of 1923, to bring it much closer to home. And Berkeley people who fail to remember their history are going to be repeating it. We did have a major fire, and then of course the tunnel fire in Oakland. My grandmother, Mary Lee, on the right, lost both of her grandparents' homes, Hamilton and the Kate Lee, just inside just above Shattuck Avenue. Notice the wood shingled building, the wood shake roof, and believe it or not, just in the last 3 months, I saw a brand new wood shake roof going on a house on Cragmont Avenue. And I won't give you the intersection because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I was astonished to see that in 2020, somebody's putting a wood shake roof on a house. Our family fires, therefore, are 5 in nature, 5. And the last one, the Camp Fire, didn't burn a currently occupied house, but it destroyed the trailer that my grandmother had lived and died in her last 20 years of her life. So, you're probably aware of Paradise having been an amazingly destructive fire in terms of loss of life. In 2018, Robert and I went to Lake County to protect the house that was being rebuilt from the Mendocino complex. And at the time, it was one of the largest fires that California had seen, but it's been completely eclipsed now. This is our rebuild, and we made it out of hardy plank and a steel roof. But still, I wasn't about to let it go unprotected during a wildfire. We spent 3 days watching CAL FIRE's amazing fleet of airplanes, and then at the end, we'd been so strafed by aircraft that I decided to pour a glass of gin and turn on Rural Britannia and pretend that it was the Battle of Britain. They were actually lining up their dumping loads by our house. The Mendocino complex ended up being extremely expensive, but it's been completely dwarfed this year by our first gigafire, the August complex, that burned over a lot of the same land, burned in 5 counties: Mendocino, Lake, Colusa, Glen, Trinity. It's been an amazing fire. Our firstborn son, Michael, here is being pinned by his mother, Vivian. He's a graduate of the School of the Madeleine and Berkeley High School. And after graduating from UCLA, decided he wanted to give back to the community and go to CAL FIRE Academy up in Yountville. And he qualified as a wildland and structure firefighter. And so he's now working part-time for South Lake County Fire Department, helping give back to the community. He had that's Michael. I guess I can point to him. That's Michael there. He just came out of a burning building. It's kind of weird as a parent to watch your son disappear into a burning building, but you have confidence in the people who are his mentors. His very first fire was just a few miles from us. A fatal explosion started a fire, and it was very concerning because the fire was in line with the wind to a community of old resort cabins inhabited in large part by Bay Area retirees and set in a dense, dry manzanita and pine forest. Then I decided to go to CERT training, and I don't know, Allie, whether you want to talk about CERT later, Community Emergency Response Team, but let me just say it's one of the most amazing things I've done, and it's one of the most amazing things for Berkeley to be supporting. Our block on San Lorenzo Avenue had quite a few people go through the academy, and it was one of the most valuable weekends I've been on. So I encourage anybody to go to the CERT Training Academy. Here's my team with Captain Brian in the center. They were just amazing instructors. And I actually have given talks up here in Lake County about establishing CERT, and now we have a Lake County CERT. We've got a lot of people excited about the Community Emergency Response Team. My latest quest is to get my Wildland Firefighter 2 qualification so that I can begin helping Lake County people burn off the enormous fuel load we have here. By the way, that beard had to go because every time I looked in the mirror, I saw somebody 20 years older than I am. Well, than I think I am. So anyway, in the last 5 years, a number of counties have started PBAs, prescribed burning associations, Lake, Mendocino, Sonoma, Napa, and Humboldt, to help burn off in the winter a large part of the material that needs to be burned so it doesn't burn in autumn. And I think Alameda County should be doing the same thing, although there are air pollution issues to be looked at. Part 1.1, I'm just going to do a little thing here on climate change and wildfire because Paul asked me to put it in context. Although obviously humans have been confronting wildfires since the dawn of the human species, and I pointed out, well, the Visigoths' attack on Rome wasn't exactly a natural disaster, but it was a fire in a city. But climate change is making things a lot worse. And if you think about it, all but one of California's largest fires has happened since 2000, and now 5 out of the 6 largest has happened in 2020. Shows you how quickly the landscape is changing. Should make a distinction between fire size and totality of destruction. The 91 Oakland Hills fire was enormous at the time, 3,000 homes, but Paradise burned 18,804. Obviously, the Oakland houses were more expensive than the Paradise ones, but that doesn't make any difference to the families who lost everything. If you're interested in chapter 3, in my third contribution to Climate Abandon, I have a chapter on wildfires and climate, along with my other 2 chapters on religious responses to climate change and the loss of polar ice. So how are climate disruption and wildfire risk related? Well, it seems to me in 4 ways. Wildfire seasons are longer. It used to be we would talk about wildfire season as July, August, September. Now it's essentially April through December. And in Southern California, they're talking about year-round fire seasons, since with diminishing rainfall, you can have wildfires anytime. Secondly, seasons are hotter. You probably are aware that this summer was an extremely hot summer. And those prolonged heat spells dry out the vegetation, which is drier also because of less rain. We had 50% of normal rain this winter, and more evaporation during heat spells. And then wind events. Sunday, I left Berkeley, left my wife with some concern that she would be okay, although it turns out that Berkeley didn't have a terrible wind event. But I was sitting up here on our couch and I fell asleep because at 2 o'clock Monday morning, the winds were almost 90 miles an hour hitting our house on our hilltop. And if a fire had started, it would have been absolutely catastrophic. There's no way you can fight a fire in 90-mile-an-hour gusts. All you can do is possibly protect your house and then evacuate. But even then, evacuation is problematic in a country situation or up on Spruce Street or anywhere in the windy streets of the Berkeley and Oakland Hills. You know that things are real when the second lowest fire level is high. This is from Australia, and I have good friends in Australia who I chat with all the time because their fire season is just beginning, as ours hopefully is just ending. In 2018, for the first time ever, CAL FIRE added purple to its chart. Red was the highest level of danger. This was when they had 6 major fires going in Southern California. To show you how things have changed, in 2017, the Tubbs fire that took our family home in Santa Rosa, here are the top 20 destructive fires from 4 of them in October, 4 of them in 2017. Then 3 years later, you've got a new top 20. And if you look at the first, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in red, those are the largest California wildfires, and they've all happened this year in Santa Clara County, Napa County, Butte County, down east of Fresno, and of course the August Complex, which is our first gigafire. A gigafire is over 1 million acres. Accelerating wildfire risk I see has at least, it's an intersection of at least two trends: climate change that increases drought, temperature, wind events, timber kills, lengthening of fire season, as well as relentless human population growth. And lots of people now, because things are so expensive in cities and even the suburbs, are moving further and further into the WUI. And Aidan, you mentioned wildland urban interface. When I say WUI, that's what that refers to. We use WUI as short. It sounds a little bit weird, but it's called the WUI. And this leads to more homes being exposed because more homes are built in flammable areas, and also more ignitions because everybody who moves into a flammable area brings a barbecue or tire chain, chains dragging with a trailer, or maybe a wheel scraping a curb as you're parking next to dry grass. I can make this available, Ali, in your information packet rather than go through it, but I wanted to give a slide on factors influencing wildfire behavior, ranging from fuel to weather to topography to ignition sources. And there's no point in going through all of them right now, but I can make that available to people. I'm going to skip the next 5 slides, but if you want to write this down and Google it, this was a very sobering thing that somebody put out last year: a worst possible fire scenario for Southern California. In other words, what would the worst look like? And they say, just imagine an illegal firecracker thing being sparked near Palm Springs. Just look how much it would take out all the way from San Bernardino down to Oceanside and San Diego. And I won't read through this, but this is a description of what it would look like. This, of course, is an actual photograph of a Southern California fire, but I don't know which one. You can see that those homes are in a fairly hopeless situation. So part 2, the fire defense triad or tetrad. And this is what I'm going to spend most of the time on. There are 4 aspects to rationally inhabiting wildfire country, which really includes almost all of California now. I suppose if you're in downtown San Francisco or downtown Oakland with nothing but green city parks around, you might consider yourself safe. But if you remember the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, it took out the whole of Coffey Park, which was a residential suburb not near the WUI, and it was protected by a 6-lane freeway from anything near the WUI. So how do you inhabit wildfire country? Well, first of all, fire hardening your house. That's the first section. And I developed this triad: a fire hardened house set in a defensible space, protected by a dynamic response system. So let me just give you some of the elements of this. First of all, you have to think about what are the sources of ignition. There are 3 general sources of ignition. There's radiant heat from flames don't even have to impinge, but my son Michael was fighting a fire in, he was defending houses in Berryessa Estates in the Napa fire this year. And he said that like 100 feet down the hill from a house was a brush patch. And it was about 500 degrees because it all blew up at once. And he watched the vinyl siding melt off the house as they were protecting it. So radiant heat, like being near, feeling the heat from a heater, is very significant. Then there's direct flame contact on exposed wood. And perhaps the most dangerous is burning debris that gets into your roof vents and so forth. So you've got to harden your house against all 3 of these sources of heat. Some of the ways to do it, and we did this when rebuilding our house after the Valley Fire: hardy plank, which is a concrete board, steel or Class A asphalt roof. We went with steel. Dual paned windows, boxed eaves, rain gutters, spark-proof vents, fire-resistant decks, railings, and balconies. All of these things are factors that are important. This is the first time I saw our place after the Valley Fire, and that was the only structure that survived. It was our garage. And guess what? The green planks there are not wood, they're concrete, set on top of bricks. So that absolutely sold us on rebuilding with hardy plank when we rebuilt the house. It adds to the expense, but it's worth it. So here you just have a close-up look of HardiePlank. It's concrete impregnating cloth so you can nail through it, and then it's stamped with a wood grain. So you have to get up really close and knock on it before you realize it isn't wood. This is what radiant heat did to the blinds on the garage that we had. It just melted the vinyl blinds from the outside. So here's our rebuilt going up, and you can see it's covered with plywood up here, and then Tyvek cloth for waterproofing, and then the HardiePlank on top of it. We also went with a raised seam steel roof because even though it's more expensive, it lasts 3 times as long and gives us peace of mind while fighting a fire. And I didn't even think at the time that if you think about how many asphalt roofs you would go through, it'd probably be 3 or 4 in the lifetime of a steel roof. So there's all that asphalt shingle material going into a landfill. When your steel finally rusts through and it's time to replace it, you just melt it down, you recycle it. There's the garage, and it did actually survive with an asphalt shingle roof, but a pine tree fell on it a year later, and so we replaced it with a steel roof. Now, these are pictures not of our house, but of places in Berkeley. Fortunately, they're not disclosed, the addresses, but what can you can probably see what's wrong here around the base of a house. Wood chips, eucalyptus leaves. Up here, you can see a problem with venting. You get pine needles building up inside of a vent. By the way, this is the minimum mesh size now allowed for roof vents. So Ali, we can include this in your information packet. And actually, I took this off of Berkeley, a UC Berkeley site of Class A vents, mesh coverings, don't use fiberglass or plastic. This is all fairly standard building stuff. There's a picture of my sister Mary and me enjoying our very tiny deck, which unfortunately is a redwood deck. And I'm now in the process of exploring buying Phoscheck. And Phoscheck is a residential form of the same stuff they dump out of airplanes. And you spray it on your redwood at the beginning of fire season, and it washes off in the rain, and it's non-toxic and biodegradable, but it prevents it from burning. That's what our rebuild looks like. And you can see that we lost a lot of our trees. It looks pretty spare, but it's concrete and with a steel roof, and we're happy with it. A side deck that is again a problem. And one of the things to note is that avoid the temptation of storing anything under a deck. So many homes have tons and tons of crap stored under a deck, which is all very flammable. Here's a wisteria trellis, very flammable wood material right under a poorly vented attic here. That would be a great way for embers to go in. Here you see somebody has allowed a mass of pine needles to build up under this eave. This would become a roaring inferno and catch the house on fire right away. Here's another resource, Ali, that we should include, the University of California Homeowners Wildfire Mitigation Guide. It's very comprehensive, and it's both, I think you can get a hard copy, but it's all online as well. And it gives you everything you need to know about top of the house, vents, side of the house, surroundings, and so forth. It's there's no point in going through it here, but it would be excellent to give to people, both for building new buildings and for retrofitting old. So second, creating defensible space. How do you do that? What you want to do is, well, this is a picture of our hill before the Valley Fire. It was, I estimate it had 50 to 80 TPA, or tons per acre. I'm trying to maintain it now at 10 to 15 tons per acre. We're not cutting everything, but we're getting rid of a lot of the brush, and we're limbing the trees up so that they're out of the range of ladder fuels. Here's what the hill looks like post-fire. You can see it's a lot more grass and a lot less brush. This is what happens when you don't mitigate the brush around your house. So how to create defensible space, and I can make this available afterwards. No plants closer than 5 feet. Concrete, stone, or gravel patio, gravel walkways, no chipped wood. Plant a fire-resistant landscape. Research plants that are moist and retain water and don't flash fuel. Limb trees up 12 to 15 feet. Eliminate ladder fuels. Remove brush within a 100-foot radius. And recently, I've begun, the last couple of years, irrigating heavily in late summer to simulate early autumn rains. I have a picture of that coming up. Speaking of the Hess learning curve, my grandmother built this house in 1939. You can see it's a wood shake roof. It's a wooden house with a wood shake roof set among very dry vegetation. There was no way that was not going to burn in 1962. She bought the land for $15 an acre. There's her son, my father, Hamilton Hess, who as late as 89 was out helping me burn. And we have taught our sons as well. So it's a long family project to keep the place brush free. This is a wintertime shot. Here's Robert, the one you saw earlier. When he was 8 years old, he loved using a blowtorch, starting fires. And he's a very good burner now. And here's me using a flamethrower. I developed that technique a few years ago. We're really trying to take advantage of the fire and clear as much as we possibly can. Just a contrasting view of before and after the Valley Fire. I'm not trying to denude the hill of brush, but I want to create chaparral islands in a landscape of mown grass. Burning in the winter. And one thing I did that you can do is use Google Earth's radius tool to see what 150 feet from your house looks like. See what kind of work you have to do to make it brush free. Defensible space includes fire, chainsaw, herbicides, tractors, a lot of which are expensive. And fortunately, we have friends who have these tools and we help them with it. I won't go through this, but I examined carefully the question of why tractors and herbicides. And so one thing I do is with Scotch broom is to paint it very carefully with herbicide to kill it. Scotch broom is a very flammable invasive species. Here's an after shot. It's pretty obvious why one of these homes survived and the other didn't. This is a house in the Wooey. I had a question at the last meeting in Berkeley about the gain of tree removal. And basically, tree removal is not necessary if you limb trees up. Trees are beautiful and they're part of the landscape. You don't have to cut down all your trees, but you have to have them up out of the range of ladder fuel. I'm not even sure why all of this is here, except that in our discussion, the Berkeley Fire Department was wanting to have a conversation with licensing people. In fact, on Next Door Neighborhood, I've seen an ongoing dispute about various canyons north of Berkeley in El Cerrito, where people are very concerned about the buildup of fuels. Oh, here's the kind of sprinkler. I don't have the tripod, but I sprinkle regularly to keep the fuel moist. Third section, developing a dynamic fire response system. This really is only for people who feel competent and confident in a moderate fire situation. We have a 20,000 gallon capacity cistern. We have fire hydrants, high pressure fire pump, 350 fire hose, and a fire cannon nozzle. This is not something you would do in the event of a direct, huge wall of fire coming at you. There's my father in his walker shortly before his death at the tank that he built by hand in 1960. So this is I keep it at 16,000 gallons, which is the white painted line. The roof burned off in the Valley Fire, but it's still serviceable. And then we have fire hydrants that can be used either by our system or by a fire truck that comes in. We have pumps, and we have, let's see, fire hose, some of which I got from City of Berkeley, which was landfilling fire hose. And they said, do you want it? I said, yes. So we have hundreds of feet of fire hose and a high pressure nozzle. good nozzle. And of course, here is testing the fire system. And if you're male and you're teenage, you want a picture taken like this. So it's a way to show your capacity for Allie. I see you're really enjoying this. So it can spray well over the roof of our house, and I test it annually to make sure that I can drop water on the top of the house so it goes down into the gutter and fills the gutter with water. Anyway, moving on to the fourth final part, which is the evacuation plan. There's a difference between an orderly evacuation and GTFO, where F does not mean fire truck. Get the F out. And we want preferably an orderly evacuation rather than chaotic. And I've seen a lot of discussion in Berkeley recently about how you train for and practice and have drills about an orderly evacuation. And it's just very difficult to think about a 2 a.m. evacuation from Grizzly Peak Boulevard down through all those streets, going down to Calusa and beyond. And of course, everywhere south to the campus and south of the campus to Oakland. So you want to identify more than one escape route, depending on where the fire is coming from. You want to practice pet and family and pet evacuation. Choose a meeting space outside and contact persons. We have contact people who don't live in Berkeley, who we know are the person to call in case we get separated. And Allie, back to what you were saying earlier before we started the meeting about, I forgot what you called it, the basic list.
The go bags.
The go bags, yes. So
Yes.
Photos, documents, hard drives, medications, passports, all of these things. Actually, that's the next bullet point as well. And so that's an important thing for us to discuss as we develop resources. Here's this is a community right near me, Loch Lomond, and I've got a dear friend who lives right here who is ambulatory, but she's got a neighbor on one side with MS who can't get around, and a couple of elderly neighbors here. CAL FIRE is worried, this is east, a fire coming up from here through Loch Lomond in an intense wind would take out probably 500 homes at night with people who could barely move. And here, of course, you've probably seen this about the campfire in Paradise. There's Pence Road, Skyway, and Clark Road, the only 3 exits out of Paradise. There were, 86 people killed in that fire, many of whom got stopped because cars just absolutely blocked the road, and some of them survived in a Walmart parking lot. I took this picture the first time I visited Paradise after the fire. Here was a car lifted up on a rack ready to be worked on by mechanics that day, and that's where it stood. Here are cars in Paradise and cars in the Oakland Hills in 1991. Very same situation, people who didn't make it out, who probably had to flee on foot. This is Grizzly Peak Boulevard, and I have a friend up here, and I won't show you her street, but I'm very concerned about her because these various streets, depending on whether a fire is coming from the east or the northeast or the north or the south, presumably not from the west, but anything coming up from here, from Lake Anza, from Wildcat Canyon, would be a significant problem for how to evacuate. And this is a close-up of it. There's this one little green area that is not enough. It's too close to the houses on either side to survive. So this is something that Berkeley really needs to think about, particularly up in the hills. Also, last year there was an article about insurance companies starting to drop policies on properties in the Berkeley Hills. That's another huge community issue for us to look at. Now, that's really the end of what I have to say, apart from public policy issues, and I don't know where we stand as far as time goes. Allie or Aiden?
We have time. If you want to stop with this discussion, then we could talk about policy after Ali maybe gives an update, that would be great. Otherwise, we can jump right in.
Well, okay, I can just whip through. There are about there's 6 issues that probably would be worth looking at. Okay, let me do this.
Yeah, please
So,
take as much time as you need. This
Defensible
is very
space preparation. What tools should CAL FIRE have to enforce this annual task, or the Berkeley Fire Department? As I've said, your defensible space is only as good as your neighbors. I had a friend during the Valley Fire who spent 15 minutes raking pine needles off his deck when he could have been saving family photos. And then his house exploded when his neighbor's house exploded. Should some areas not be allowed to be rebuilt? And that's a huge private property issue. And I have a slide on that. Should real estate transactions include notification of fire hazard? When my wife and I bought our place in Berkeley in 1995, our real estate agent was very amused that the 3 things we wanted were a garage, hardwood floors, and non-proximity to the Hayward Fault. She said, "You're the first person I've ever heard base a decision on whether to buy a house by whether it's near the Hayward Fault." And now I would say non-proximity to the WUI as well, which of course put us out of the hills and down toward the flats. Should insurance companies be allowed to redline what they determine to be wildfire hazard zones? And that's already happening. How should these matters be adjudicated in a free society with a free market economy? Fire emergency alert, digital or old-fashioned siren. So just to go through these, why don't people create defensible space? Some don't understand it. Some can't afford it. Some have never, I actually can't read this because the pictures are covering it up. But you can see that there are a variety of reasons why people don't clear defensible space. And up here in Cobb, we're trying to use programs where kids need to do, they need to have community service hours to graduate. We're trying to match them up with elderly people who need debris removal, brush removal, because they can't do it. And so there might be some very creative ways to help develop this in an urban context. Should CAL FIRE be able to issue citations? Well, they do, but they're not up here. There don't seem to be many teeth. I don't know whether there are in Berkeley, whether if you get a citation and you don't mitigate your problem, you can get fined for it. Should we employ people on welfare, workfare, or AmeriCorps, or employ prison trustees? Are there creative ways we could get this work done that we haven't thought of? Should restrictions be made where people are not allowed to build, like in this matchstick forest in the California foothills, or is that un-American? California needs 130,000 new houses every year just to keep up with demand. And you can see what happens as houses are built out into the WUI. The red and the black outline indicate the Tubbs fire of 2017, which burned over the exact area of 1964, or virtually the same footprint. Here's Fountain Grove on the left, beautiful development, and on the right, what it looked like after the Tubbs fire. The wind direction was from here, and it just took out 1,000 houses here, and the streets were narrow, and there were people who didn't make it out of Fountain Grove alive. Real estate industry, should it disclose wildfire risk? A lot of people move here from the East Coast where they've never had wildfire. They're not even aware of asking about it as I was. What should real estate agents have to say? Let's see, I'm going to move straight to the emergency alert. In the Tubbs fire and in the Valley fire, we had Nixle alerts. We had electronic alerts. But particularly in the Tubbs fire, people died because they were not of the digital generation. They didn't have smartphones. And would sirens have saved their lives? At Cobb, actually, we decided after the Valley fire to put in several old-fashioned sirens, although there are big complaints about it because there's a siren test every second or every first Tuesday of the month. And in my new house, inside with double-pane windows, I can't hear it at all. And so so there are bugs that need to be worked out, but this whole question of how to handle the digital divide and the fact that not everybody has a phone that they sleep with on. In fact, I saved my sister's life, according to her, because she goes to sleep without her phone on. And I texted her at the last minute and woke her up and a couple behind her in the street behind her didn't make it out alive. So anyway, I do run a group for people who've lost their homes. So if you know anybody who's lost a home in wildfire, send them to the Wildfire Home Loss Peer Support Community on Facebook. And well, that's just a description of it. And then Living with Wildfire Risk, that's an open group. Anybody who's interested in living with wildfire risk can join that Facebook group. So conclusions: appreciate fire ecologies, understand climate change, remember that it's more sustainable not to lose homes than to rebuild them. Educate homeowners to fire risk, intelligently build sustainable fire defensible communities, and base public policy decisions on sound science. And I remember that there's a presidential candidate who warned about another presidential candidate who might actually listen to scientists, and that's a bad thing. And I don't agree with him. I think we need to listen to sound science on this. So that's what I have, and I guess we can open up for questions now.
I guess I can start with a question, Peter, if you're okay with that. So you showed a map of Southern California. I noticed in the worst case scenario, what would happen. Well, I actually grew up in Southern California, and it reached right about to where my parents live currently. And so just for their sake, I'm thinking, like, how do we encourage the greater public to understand this without the market taking drastic actions like those insurance policies or not being able to cover anything if it happens? What would you say to my parents, like, who have lived in Southern California for over 30 years, feel comfortable in their housing, but they see that map and they're like, wow, what can happen?
Well, the fact that, I mean, Southern California has had lots of massive fires. It just seems a little odd that the focus has been on Northern California in the last few years. But there are major fires going in Los Angeles now, and 2 firefighters are in critical condition because of a fire near Irvine. So I think what I would say to everyone is that this same recipe applies to Southern California or to Colorado, which you know just had its biggest fire year ever, as applied to Northern California, and that is retrofit your home. Now, older people who've lived in their home forever don't necessarily have $30,000 to put on a new roof. But when you do need a new roof, like we did, when a tree fell through our garage, the garage that had survived the fire, we found that the cost differential between a steel roof and an asphalt roof was fairly slender, not even counting the fact that a steel roof has 3 times the longevity. So if possible, I would suggest that people retrofit their houses with fireproof siding and with fireproof roofing. And also take seriously, both as individual homeowners and as a community, the kind of vegetation around it. I was actually pro bono consulting for a woman in El Cerrito who had had a discussion with me on Next Door Neighbor, and I went up to see her house, and surrounding her house was a huge juniper hedge, and juniper is one of the most flammable things you can have. So she decided she's going to take it out. So I would say, Aidan, you don't have to put the fear of God in people that they have to sell and move to a condominium in the middle of a concrete parking lot. There are very sound strategies that one can do as a community. And, you know, there are communities that survive. People also have to be willing to pay more for fire protection. When it comes down to the fire service defending neighborhoods, they do a very good job with it, you know, except in exceptional circumstances. Now, I don't know what to say about this in terms of climate change, because I thought the winds here on Monday were pretty scary at 90 miles an hour. If climate change just continues for the next 20, 30, 50 years, are we going to get 150 mile an hour winds? Is everything going to be entirely unprecedented? That's unknown, but it makes sense that your campaign is wanting to focus on thinking this through rather than sidestepping it. And too many people say it's too scary, so I don't want to think about it, which doesn't help anybody at all. So yes, your parents should think about it, but shouldn't panic. And what we're developing here, what Allie's going to put together, what the UC Berkeley group has, there are tons and tons of resources for how you can rationally inhabit wildfire country.
Thank you, Peter. That's very helpful.
You're
We have
welcome.
another question from an audience member. This one comes from Justin. So they have a question about understanding our relationship to nature, how to find a balance between dominating nature and living among natural cycles. Do you think you could answer that for us, Peter?
In fewer than 2 days. I've actually taught whole courses, and lots of people have taught courses on humanity inhabiting nature. Yeah, I'm not, I'm not thrilled with the idea that humans can go wherever they want on the earth and simply mow down natural landscapes and plant nothing but shopping centers and golf courses and strip malls. And so I think there are responsible and irresponsible ways to inhabit nature. As somebody who's very concerned about overpopulation, one of the things I would say is the human population has to become stable. You can't have 10, 15, 20 billion people on Earth and expect to avoid disasters. And the other huge area that we haven't even touched on because it's not relevant here is hurricanes and rising sea levels, which do for some parts of the Earth what wildfires do for the West. So I think there are responsible ways. I ended up in the country not by my choice, but because my grandmother built a house there. I think if I were choosing it again, I would not go and find a brushy hill to put a house on. But I'm not saying don't go out in the country. There are beautiful aspects of living in the country. But I think for too long, humans have simply thought that we have a right to go wherever we want. And one of the other issues we're dealing with in Lake County is people wanting to shoot all the bears and the mountain lions. Well, we're the ones living in their territory. And so we move out there and we say, well, you don't belong because you're going to eat my pets. Therefore, we have to kill you. I don't know whether this really answers the question or whether I sidestepped it.
I thought it was a great answer.
Thank you.
Ali, did you want to ask a question? I think I saw you.
Yes, I do. Peter, what is I understand that here in the city, we have the chipper or the fire fuel chipper program, but it is only made available for Berkeley Hill residents only like twice a year between, from what I believe, it's June and is it June? Yeah, it's June and August. In your opinion, do you believe that we should fight to maybe increase these pickups?
Excellent question. And we're actually dealing with that in Cobb Mountain now. Cobb Mountain's about 90 miles north of Berkeley, and it's very different in that it's quite rural. We have lots of older people without a lot of income, living in heavily timbered and heavily brushed places. And essentially the ways we have to get rid of flammable material is either to burn it or to haul it away to landfills or to chip it. You can't really loft it into outer space. I do a lot of burning because it's actually, if you burn in winter, it's not going to burn catastrophically in October. I feel for people who are concerned about air pollution and want to do chipping, although I don't know what kind of air pollution a chipper runs. On our property, we've got 80 acres, a lot of which is very hilly, and I'd have to haul everything half a mile to a road. People who live near a road, whether in the Berkeley Hills or, around Tilden Park or further out, who have access to a chipper, I think that's a great option. What to do with the chips is another question. Some people use them for landscaping, and up here there was a plan to use them for clean burning power generation sites. There was going to be a power generation site in Lake County fueled by the wood chips from the 7 million trees we lost in the Valley Fire. I'm not sure what happened to that. And of course, there is an environmental cost of of loading and hauling away loads of wood and chipping them and then burning them. But I think it's a great option, Allie, and I don't really know where Berkeley is with it. I think it should be there and it should be expanded.
I
Thank you.
agree.
I also think, and I know you and I've talked about this before, Allie, but education is an enormous aspect of this. And I'm finding this in Cobb, that a lot of people who come up here have never used a chainsaw or a weed eater or a rake. And I actually have a little logo that somebody made in sarcasm about the claim that we should rake our forests. And it's a very nice logo called United States Rake Force. And I'm very happy to display that because I'm often out raking my forest, which of course is not at all what he meant when he said it. But we need people to enjoy engaging in manual labor. And one of the most healing things about living in the country for me, at least part-time, is not just removing the brush, but it's planting trees. It's grooming the forest. It's helping the forest grow. It's providing habitat for animals. And so I think education would be as huge a factor as providing things like chipping. And I don't know where that fits in with your program, but a lot of kids would lap up environmental education.
Yeah, my family and I did the chipper program, or the Firefield chipper program up here, and it actually became like a family bonding activity where it's, hey guys, let's go in the backyard, who can collect the most leaves and put it in the bag, and things like that. So it was a really great bonding activity, and I love to post pictures on it on social media because I also wanted to display it, that it can be a bonding activity. It can be fun, and it's also extremely important. The other question I had on top of the chipper program is, I understood when you had said to not use wood chips. How do you feel about maybe garden mulch, which is like a mixture of soil and like really soft wood chips? Like, would you recommend that versus the wood chips when creating a fire barrier?
Well, CAL FIRE would say nothing flammable within 5 feet of the house. And I think they're absolutely right. We have nothing but gravel. And, aesthetically, it's a different aesthetic than wood chips. But I have a friend up here who had just rebuilt a beautiful house. And I was horrified when I saw that she had piled up wood chips next to it. And then recently she took me aside at a supermarket and said, hey, guess what? We got rid of that. We have gravel. And, gravel walks can be very nice. So within 5 feet, you don't want anything flammable. That would seem to me just common sense. The other thing.
Go ahead,
Pardon?
please. There's another question in the chat, but please finish this one.
Okay, no, go ahead. I was going to change the subject.
Okay. So this is from Justin again. Policy and organizational question. Would it be feasible and safe to organize neighbors to form work parties to remove ground and ladder fuel along the urban wild interface in their neighborhoods? And are these questions of liability to contend with? With enough people power, maybe we can avoid using herbicides. So I think there's 3 questions in there.
The first one about work parties? Was the first one about work? Well, absolutely. And in fact, in this discussion on next door neighborhood, where I often run into Allie, I guess we find each other interested in the same sorts of issues. You may have seen this one, Allie, about El Cerrito. And they're talking about the massive amount of stuff and how it's beyond any one person's capacity to do. And they are talking exactly about work parties. I mean, we had up here at Cobb, we had a broom busting event back in February to pull and cut Scotch broom. And regrettably, there weren't too many young people. There was one nice girl who was about 15, but everybody else had other things going on. So it tended to be middle-aged people who were doing this. But I think work parties are an essential part of it. As you just said, Allie, make it a family thing, make a game out of it so that it becomes less of an onerous duty and something that you see as as a joyous participation in helping make your neighborhood fire safe. What was the second part, Hayden?
Yeah. So the issue about liability, is that something to contend with? And speaking on liability, does the city have a role to play in these organizational parties, or just leave it up to the neighborhoods, would you recommend?
That's a big question. And as I said, I'm going for my Wildland Firefighter 2 qualifications, which won't allow me to fight big fires like my son does, but it'll allow me to help with prescribed burning. Now, prescribed burning carries liability because there's always a possibility you're going to light a fire that gets out of control. I don't really know how that works. If you're talking about urban work parties, you mean that somebody gets stabbed with a pitchfork? What sorts of liability issues do you see? I mean, I can see that private homeowners wouldn't want people coming on their land and getting hurt and suing them, and that maybe municipalities might do the same thing. So that is an excellent question that needs to be sorted out, but I wouldn't say that it's a deal breaker. I wouldn't say don't even think about work parties because of the liability issue. Let's just find out what the liability is and find out creative ways to address it. There must be hundreds of people with legal backgrounds who'd be willing to take that on pro bono. And the third part of the question?
That's about herbicides. Could we possibly avoid using them? And if we can't, what's the worst case scenario for herbicide use when it comes to wildfires?
I don't use herbicide on anything like weeds or grass. I use it on chaparral, which is evolutionarily designed to come back every time there's a wildfire. So the only way to eradicate it is to kill the root system. And I use the cut and paint method that the Nature Conservancy and CAL FIRE recommend, where you cut the brush at the base, and it's maybe 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter. And then I very carefully paint with a paintbrush. I paint the herbicide right around the cambium layer, so it never touches the soil. It just is absorbed by the plant and it starves the plant to death. The only other way to tackle brush like that is with giant excavators. And we actually had that done on one of our hillsides after the Valley Fire. And it caused such massive erosion, leading to siltation of the pond and stream, that we just didn't think it's worth it. The advantage of the herbicidal method is that if you're not, broadcast spraying it around the countryside, you're only affecting the plant in question. And the herbicide has a half-life of 8 days, and it's absorbed by the plant and does its work and then disappears. But there are other methods. You could use mechanical methods, and I'm not sure what they used in cutting down all the eucalyptus in the Berkeley Hills. They're trying to get rid of the very flammable eucalyptus and replace it with bay laurel and coast live oak and things like that are natives and are less fire prone.
And that's directly the next question, the last question we'll have. It comes about eucalyptus trees, and they mentioned that it's potentially a knee-jerk reaction, but how do we distinguish between removing trees versus removing ladder fuel?
That also sounds like 2 questions. Are eucalyptus bad? Eucalyptus are not native to California. They were brought in as windbreaks, and they were brought in for railroad ties, and they proliferate, and they were a major cause of the acceleration of the tunnel fire in 1991. I'm not completely anti-eucalyptus. I love the eucalyptus that are at Indian Rock Park, where I go rock climbing. I know that in some neighborhoods, people are very concerned at how much flammable material falls off them. In a sense, that's a maintenance issue. I suppose you could have fire-safe eucalyptus if people actually took care of them, but it means you've got to rake the leaves and rake up the bark and dispose of it on a regular basis, or you have a buildup of the material. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, how do we distinguish between removing trees versus removing the ladder fuel?
Well, I hike a lot in Tilden Park, and there are some areas where the eucalyptus are so densely packed that you just have, it's like walking into a cathedral of tree trunks. And they're kind of biological deserts on the ground because they don't allow much forage for animals. Um, and you could actually make things much better by thinning them so that you have fewer very large specimens than this vast forest of small specimens coming up. Ladder fuel really is a critical question for any wildfire. And I have this group of older people that I hike with. We call ourselves the Wildcatters because we all met on Wildcat Peak, and now we're up to about 8 people. And I led them on a secret trail that I discovered, which some of them were not too happy about because they came down with poison oak afterwards. And I was realizing I would not want to be on that secret trail during a red flag warning at wildfire day because the ladder fuel is so dense that it would be a risk to your life to get out of there. And what's surprising is that's less than a mile from Grizzly Peak Boulevard. You got a substantial portion of the eastern edge of Berkeley impinging on that. Now, how to remove all that ladder fuel is, and make the entire area of Tilden Park look like Golden Gate Park is beyond me, because Golden Gate Park in San Francisco is an urban park. It's basically lawns with trees on it. And not everybody wants lawns with trees on it around Lake Anza or around some of our other wild areas like John Hinkle Park. But, I think, and this gets back to neighborhoods. Neighborhood people are the ones who have a stake in this and who know what's particularly dangerous. And maybe they can bring it to the attention of the fire department and say, this area needs to be mitigated because it's right below a bunch of houses.
Well, thank you, Peter. Again, this has been such an amazing scenario, understanding the complexities of wildfire preparedness. And I think you gave a really good tips for the Berkeley community to start adapting to this changing climate. And so I want to say thank you once again for this presentation.
Thank you.
With that said, I want to leave the window open for Ali. Ali, do you want to talk about your experiences being a community organizer in the Berkeley Hills? And what's your take on wildfire as well as disaster preparedness in general?
Thank you so much, Aiden. And thank you, Peter, for all of your service and, you and your family and all that you've done for folks in Cobb. And, there have been times I've reached out to you for advice, and I appreciate you always being open. I'm sorry, my 4-year-old is very jumpy right now. But so for me as a community organizer, back in 2017, I volunteered at a high school shortly after a wildfire. And just being in that situation and seeing folks, these were folks who were completely exhausted. They were devastated because they basically lost everything that they had. Please stop. Please stop. And I knew that, especially once I moved up here in Berkeley, the reality of that possibly happening up here hit me. So last year I really took it personally and made it a personal mission to make sure that myself as well as my neighbors continue to be safe at all times. And emergency preparedness, you really, in my opinion, and I always tell folks this, you can never be too prepared. It's better to be more prepared than not prepared at all. So I reached out with CERT. I finished during COVID-19. Teresa? And so I did my CERT lecture portion online during this COVID-19 crisis. Last year, I did the Firefield Chipper program, but it wasn't as much as definitely not as much as this year. And so just for me, getting out in the community and constantly always talking about getting prepared for a wildfire and being prepared for any type of emergency, including pandemics. We in Berkeley, not just in the hills, always need to be prepared, no matter what disaster may come our way.
Mhm. Can I just make a comment about that, Allie?
Yeah, absolutely.
A community that might be worth reaching out to. And in my group of home loss survivors, I have one woman who was a teenager during the Oakland Hills fire. So she's now in her late 40s. One of my acquaintances was Bishop John Cummins, the Catholic Bishop of Oakland, who was Bishop of Oakland during the Oakland Hills fire. And he went to St. Teresa's Parish for Mass. There were 240 families out of the parish had lost their homes in the Oakland Hills fire. And, you know, there must be a community of survivors who, you know, they're 30 years, next year is the 30th anniversary of the Oakland Hills fire, who have plenty of information and ideas and resources for Berkeley. I just haven't explored that because my focus has been sort of more rural than urban. But I can look into that and see if that would be of a help for you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely, you know, interested in any type of information I can collect to help my neighbors, help my community. I'm completely open for it, 100%.
Yeah. There was one, go ahead.
Huh? No, it's okay. What were you going to say, Peter?
I was going to go back to the question about community, and you'd made a remark about it, but we were moving to your presentation at that moment. So if I can mention this for about 30 seconds. In the late 90s, I was co-teaching a class on environmental ethics at the Graduate Theological Union. And one of the guest lecturers was an amazing African-American pastor whose surname I don't know. His first name was Henry. And he was from Richmond. And he gave the most amazing presentation because he said, you know, a lot of the Black kids and Hispanic kids in Richmond have nothing in common with the Sierra Club in that they don't go to REI, they don't go to Yosemite, but they found a special way to connect with nature because he started a program to daylight all the creeks, to take all the creeks that have been paved over from the hills to the bay and dig them up and get the kids involved in everything from the legal process of obtaining right-of-way to the physical process of digging up pavement and bringing in rocks and trees and plants and learning about riparian ecosystems. And he said it was just amazing to see how nature, which was not something foreign, was brought home to their local neighborhoods. And it really was a community building thing for that neighborhood. And I'm thinking that the same thing might be true with, I'm on another committee called, for the Sierra Club, called Fire Resilience. And we're trying to get people to look at both before and after a fire. What does it involve to be resilient living in a wildfire community? And what can you do to protect yourself and to minimize the effect of fire? So I see scope for enormous community involvement and bringing in younger people, making it transgenerational. I mean, older people have a lot of wisdom to give, younger people have a lot of energy. Why not utilize every aspect of this by bringing them together?
I absolutely and completely agree. And to be honest, I love the idea of bringing in community service folks, you know, high school folks, and bringing them up here to really help out my community. I mean, I have like an 87-year-old neighbor. I have neighbors who work full time or have small children and really just can't get to vegetation management. And especially with the chipper program, like it's kind of like, for me, it was like, okay, we're preparing for it and it's a lot of work. And then it's like 2 weeks later, there's more, and it can be quite overwhelming for some folks. So right. I mean, that's going to be my new mission for 2021. Let's get those community groups out there so we can really start, you know, getting some of this vegetation handled. So yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you so much for that.
Well, count me in. I've got clippers and a saw and I travel. I'd love to come help you.
Beautiful. I would love the help, definitely. But on that note, Aiden, if you don't mind, I would love to start my presentation. All right.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
No, you're all good. Don't worry.
Right,
So,
feel free. Thank you.
Hello, Berkeley neighbors, everyone. Again, my name is Ali. I am an avid emergency preparedness nerd. I love everything that comes with wildfire, evacuations, preparedness, etc. But let's be honest here, especially here in Berkeley, it's not just wildfires that we're having to deal with. I mean, we are also in the middle of a pandemic at this time. We have to get prepared for earthquakes or, wildfires, extreme cold weather. I mean, this year it was very hot weather, as well as droughts. And these are very important things that we all as a city and as a community need to be prepared for. So a lot of what Peter said was what happens during, a wildfire. And today I would love to talk to all of you about like being prepared and what does that look like? Because I'm actually using my cell phone versus my laptop. What I'm going to do is as soon as I'm done talking, I'm going to drop a bunch of the links to the things that I am going to be talking about. So first things first, when it comes to entering wildfire season, it's always important to check in with the city of Berkeley when we're talking about, the fire fuel chipper program, figuring out when your date is, when it is, where you need to pick up the bags, how often are they going to be picked up? And if you have a little bit more time once you get your things outside, please help out your neighbors. Because like I said, there are some vulnerable communities up here that may need an extra hand, and that could be, life-saving for your neighbor. Yes, Teresa, please stop.
Can I go to talk now?
Yes, I'm still talking. We're playing the quiet game. We're playing the quiet game. Okay. And as well as getting prepared for all of that. I mean, going into wildfire season, especially this year for me, I hooked up with the CERT office. I went and I finished my lecture portion of CERT training, and I got that done and out of the way. I learned so much. I shared that information with my neighbors so that we as a neighborhood can be a resilient neighborhood, so that we can build together to keep each other safe. One thing that we did do this year is we created like a neighbor buddy program. So when it came to evacuating, like for me, I have a 90-something-year-old neighbor who lives underneath me. That is my buddy. So for my buddy, it is like in the case of an emergency, I always need to make sure she's safe. We're at our meeting space. And if she is not present, I need to go, whether alert someone or if it is safe, go check in on her. So that was a program that we as a neighborhood created together. We went through our evacuation routes, and here we created like, what is a walking path? If our meeting place is over here and we're unable to walk for whatever reason, can we drive there? How can we get there? So talking to your neighbors is such a huge and important piece when it comes to any type of emergency preparedness. So there's that. Also checking in with the City of Berkeley Emergency Radio, which is 1610 AM, and checking in with like news outlets and the emergency alert systems that usually do pop up. For us up here in the hills, I'm not really sure about the rest of Berkeley, but we received AC alerts. And I mean, we received so many notifications. My partner and I were like in the bed, and it's like Berkeley Hills, you guys should leave before 4 p.m. And that's such incredible and crucial information. And it gave us enough time to be able to get the most vulnerable neighbors of ours out of here so that they can be safe. And I think that that's just really important. So making sure that you're plugged into like AC alerts or Warn Me Berkeley, getting in tuned with that over, like Peter said, going over your evacuation routes, which also includes driving and on foot, using the Berkeley Pathways maps to figure out an alternate route outside to your meeting place. If you have to escape by foot, here we have, Easter Way Pathway, which brings us straight down to Spruce, which is an amazing pathway. So my family and I, Teresa. So we as a family, we go through our evacuation plan often. Out downstairs on my door, I also made a map for all of my neighbors, because I live in a multi-unit building, for all of my neighbors to be able to see the map, visualize it. So when things go down, we know where to go, who to talk to, etc. Please stop. So I'm going to plug in those links as well. And then also making sure that your go bags are ready and in an accessible place, which includes like water, food, batteries.
Mommy, give me your nails.
Like a whistle, just in case, you're trapped and we may not be able to see you. Making sure that you have flashlights with extra batteries.
Put your hand on your computer. Put your hand on your.
And especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, and because I did my CERT training during COVID, it was a lot of emphasis on like making sure that you're wearing a mask, that you have hand sanitizer, disinfecting wipes so that you can wipe things down if necessary. So those are all super really important things as well. And then one thing I learned this year that I believe that folks should carry is a wrench and pliers to turn off utilities if needed. But that's like more of a cert thing, but that's so incredibly important to have, because, you're out of your house and you're on your way and you're like, oh man, there could be an electrical fire. And then also having a copy of your evacuation routes and things like that. So I'm going to, in the chat, as well as I'm going to send out an email blast of all the resources in which I'm talking about. But one of the most important ones that I am going to talk about is the Sesame Street. Sesame Street came out with a disaster preparedness series where it includes like games for children to learn about like evacuating safely during a wildfire, learning games so that they can learn their full name and their parents' name. So if they ever got lost, they would be able to go back to that song, as well as learning who the special helpers are, which includes firefighters, police officers, doctors, as well as for us this year, we also got to know our neighbor buddy, the person in which I would be in charge of making sure was okay. But yeah, that was pretty much it. It's just, for me, it's all about preparedness, making sure that you're ready at all times. Because, like I said, wildfires is not just the only hazard or the only type of disaster that can hit Berkeley. And, this is incredibly important for all citizens of Berkeley, because if something was to happen to us up here in North Berkeley, we would need folks from South Berkeley, West Berkeley to come and to be able to assist us if needed. So I will drop everything inside of the chat, as well as include everything into the blast. Everyone is more than welcome to send me an email. I'm also going to drop that inside of the chat as well. And thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate everyone taking their time out of their wonderful and amazing day, because the weather is the bomb today, to be able to join us this evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Yes, thank you, Ali. I just wanted to say really quickly that you having Teresa there, and even though she's interacting with you, that's not based on wildfire preparedness, just having families present and being comfortable with one another, I think is so important for Berkeleyans to see, because at the end of the day, we have to realize that our kids are the people who are going to have to inherit whatever world we're going to live in, as Peter suggested. And so just to see Teresa there, it brings a smile to my face. So thank you.
I agree.
I thought for the I thought for the next segment, we could just go over a video that a campaign volunteer had brought together on wildfire preparedness. And so I'm going to pull that video up right now. So this one's called Why California is Burning More Than Ever Before. And we heard a lot from Peter's perspective, as well as Ali's perspective, like the things that we can do and the reasons why these fires are happening at such a quick and accelerating rate. I just think it's important that we have a visual to go along with this, especially for those who may not be well-versed in climate change. And so I'm going to bring that up right now. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
In recent years, the fires in California have been more frequent and devastating than ever before seen in history. Many are wondering, why now? Is it a company to blame? Mismanagement? Climate change? There's not just one. Many factors have contributed to the current state of fires over the last 100 years. With information from several sources, primarily the U.S. Forest Service, the California Department of Fire and Forestry, and several scientific papers, this video addresses the burning question: why is California burning more now than ever before? Let's first discuss how fire starts. The key ingredients to fire are oxygen, heat, and fuel. When you add a source of ignition or energy, such as lightning, human activities, or electricity, a fire can be generated. In terms of heat, California saw the worst drought in history in 2012 to 2016. According to studies of tree rings by geophysical scientists, this was the hottest drought in 1,200 years. In a healthy forest, there's plenty of water flowing through the body and roots of the trees, making them stronger. In times of drought, when there's less water, the trees have less immunity and therefore are more susceptible to the attack of pests. In the last 6 years, California has seen the biggest outbreak of bark beetles in history, causing thousands of trees to die. In fact, the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE determined that about 129 million trees had died on 8.9 million acres by December 2017. While healthy forests can protect themselves from fire, and drought forests are more susceptible, dead trees have no defense. So the heat in California led to more flammable fuel, but there's one more aspect of our fuel that made these fires so enormous: the sheer density of it. Not only are our forests dead, but they are extremely crowded, making it much easier for fires to burn. Forests today have trees that are denser, younger, and smaller than they were historically. According to the California Forest Association, 150 years ago, the Sierras had roughly 40 trees per acre compared to the hundreds of trees per acre today. In these comparison photos from Yosemite Valley, you can see there used to be more answer is our long history of fire suppression and logging. Logging in California has been one of the largest industries since the gold rush in 1848. With the advent of steam-powered engines, tractors, and railroads, the industry continued to grow. After World War II, there was a massive increase in demand for home building, propelling the industry forward even further. At least 20% of the pine and mixed conifer forests were harvested by the 1950s. One logging strategy that has altered our forests is called selective logging. This is where timber companies cut down the largest trees to gain maximum yield. The effect is a vastly thinner forest. And thinner, denser trees are more susceptible to fire. However, in historical conditions, fire was much less dangerous. In fact, the forest ecosystem relied on fire. The reliance on fire begins with the buildup of dead material on the forest floor. During California's dry seasons, the debris decomposes much slower and accumulates over time. This makes it much harder for living plants to get water and nutrients from the soil. When a wildfire burns through the underbrush, it sweeps out the dead matter, removing plant-eating pests and fungi along the way. When plants are burned, the water stored in their roots is released into the soil. The wood ash regenerates the soil with nutrients like phosphorus, carbon, and magnesium. With more sunlight exposure and all the regenerated nutrients, the forest can thrive, providing more flowers and fruit for the creatures among. The people who lived in California for thousands of years understood this natural cycle of fire. In fact, they used it to their advantage to cultivate plants that they could use for food and supplies. Westerners did not have such an integrated view of fire because they thought it was threatening the timber yield. This led the U.S. to make the first Forest Service in 1905, which actively worked to prevent fire. 1910 brought the big blowout, a fire consuming 3 million acres and scaring the public. After that, fire suppression policies grew even stricter. In the 1940s, the Forest Service came up with an ad campaign to spread the word about fire prevention.
Every day, more and more boys and girls, and grown-ups too, are enlisting in the battle against forest fires.
Well, that's what it takes, Smokey. Everyone pitching in to prevent them. Every year, wildfires burn up millions of our trees, they damage our valuable watersheds, they destroy the food and homes of wildlife, and they desecrate the God-given beauty of our great outdoors.
Over time, the suppression of fire caused the forest to become overly dense with trees that could not have otherwise continued to grow. When there was more fire ecology research done in the 1960s, California began prescribing fire to help the forest, but there was already years of forest alteration. Today, we are facing the largest fires California has ever seen due to decisions made hundreds of years ago. Looking forward for the safety of our homes and loved ones, it is time we consider the natural cycles of life and how our decisions now may have long-term effects in the future.
So I think we learned a lot here, and maybe we can spend the next 10 minutes or so just having a general discussion about what the next steps are for wildfire preparedness here in Berkeley. We saw a lot of the technical expertise given by Peter Hess, the on-the-ground work by Ali Rodriguez. And for me, as someone who's running for public office, it's my job to represent the people of Berkeley and use the best of our capacity to make sure that no one is harmed in our future. We see that wildfires are increasing, especially as of this year. And there's no indication that they'll decrease in the near future. And so we really do need all of us. And we really do need to have this sense of community resilience, because I know together, especially Berkeley, we can survive whatever storm is coming for us as a world, as a society, as human beings on planet Earth. And so I'm thinking we could take a few minutes just to think, what are the next steps? The first thing that we're going to do up to 2021 for us to be more prepared as a community and safer. And I invite Ali and Peter to share their thoughts as well.
I am one of those folks where I am pro neighborhood groups, pro neighborhood what do you call them? Like neighborhood unity. And it's for situations just like this. Because in the case of an emergency, like if you were ever able to evacuate and you don't know your neighbor's name and you don't know how many people are in their house, that alone will cause, it'll probably be a fatal mistake in my opinion. In what ways do you believe that we can, as a city, become more unified within our neighborhoods? Like, how can folks up here in North Berkeley connect more with folks in South Berkeley?
Mommy.
That's a great question, Ali. From my understanding and my experience being in Berkeley, there seems to be this general divide, and then there seems to be particular divides. Now, the general divide is for people in North Berkeley who are mostly homeowners. They have a stake in the politics of not only their property values, but also their quality of life, their neighborhood management systems. And you see that they're oftentimes in particular terrains that they can create themselves. Whereas people in South Berkeley, for the most part, are mostly renters. A lot of people's homes have been put on for sale or foreclosed or abandoned even. And so for those in South Berkeley who are renters, it's very difficult for them to participate in the management of their own buildings, let alone their community infrastructure. I know, for example, with my work in District 7, which is the Telegraph Avenue community, I've had a particular role in talking to the business interests, the university, which takes up the most open and green space in that area, as well as the city, who is increasingly pushing for more development in District 7. Where I come in is that I am trying to preserve and protect our only open space, the only open space with a numerous amount of trees, which is People's Park in that district, just to make sure that it's a temporary refuge area for so many people. But with the university cutting down over 40 trees in the last year alone, and seeing how smog has enveloped our city and the potential for wildfires to happen as well, let alone that this is right directly on the earthquake fault, the Hayward fault line. It's very difficult to bring these forces together, the business, the town, the gown, and the streets, to find some solidarity with one another when it comes to wildfire preparedness. But what we've seen at People's Park is when you center around community gardens, when you make sure that people are feeling like there's improvements for them in their societies, when you have active participation and modes of participation for people, they can oftentimes find common grounds to see what's truly important. And those are the commons. How do we protect our clean water? How do we protect our public space, the land in which we grow food, making sure that people have livelihoods? These are all things that Berkeleyans share. And I think if Berkeley comes together in this unification over what we have in common, rather than the differences between us, regardless if that's living, race, class, sex, or whatever other structure might be differentiating them, I think Berkeleyans have a strong chance of weathering this storm and making sure that we are all resilient for the future of climate change. Peter, did you want to give some thoughts?
Yeah. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to something Ali voiced at the beginning of her contribution, and that is that in terms of, well, I think you start with the block. At least we start with the block. About 10 or 12 years ago, this woman named Elena on our block, who has a great Brooklyn accent and was a real dynamo, was living alone, and she was the one who took up the cudgel to start CERT. And basically CERT started, I guess, in Berkeley when East Bay Municipal Utility District told the fire department that in the event of an 8.0 on the Hayward Fault, they anticipate up to 100 breaks per mile in the underground lines, and we're going to be on our own for weeks. And so Elena was the one who got us going with CERT, who made an inventory of everybody on the street. So as Ali says, we know who's in what house. We did a lot of what's called capacity identification. Who can do what? We found out that there were 3 physicians and 5 nurses on our street. I had experience in fire mitigation and prevention. We had a couple of builders who had a lot of tools for, doing search and rescue. And then, of course, we built on that capacity by going to the CERT Academy. So we found that CERT itself was what brought our street together in a way that it never had been before. And now we have lots of, well, we did before COVID, we had an annual barbecue out on the street, and we hope to get back to that. So we know we know each other. Now Elena, who started the whole thing, is not exactly an invalid, but she's more in need of care. So we look to her as somebody who would need our help rather than somebody who could lever a piano off somebody. And so, and the other aspect is beginning with the block that has come to know itself and know its capacities. And this also echoes something Ali said. And I think has Ali disappeared? I hope she can hear what I'm saying.
No, I can hear what you're saying. I'm here.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to say is moving out from the block, we're interested in connecting with other CERT groups elsewhere so that, I want to know what people in South Berkeley and West Berkeley are doing. And one of the richest aspects of the CERT Academy for me, even though it was a very brief and whirlwind, less than 48 hours, was getting to know the people from many different blocks in Berkeley who are organizing and realizing that there are real problems that some face that we don't. For example, I'm in the Thousand Oaks neighborhood, which is predominantly home ownership. Even though, in a sense, we're a moving parade because we're losing people to death and then new families move in. But it's a much slower moving parade than a part of Berkeley that's largely student, where you have a complete turnover every 4 years, or elsewhere in Berkeley, where you have people who might have the same concerns we do for community safety, but they don't have the stability of home ownership that leads to the development of long-term relationships. So I would really like to see Berkeley move toward a model where representatives of all the neighborhood CERT groups can get together and share their concerns and their strengths. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? I would love to know what somebody from, 6th and Gilman, or the boundary, the street between Oakland and Berkeley. What are their concerns that I've never thought about? And I think that would make us much stronger and more richly diversified as a community to be able to speak with the voices of other people, or at least to understand them as well as our own.
I love that, getting to know other CERT groups, because I feel that every district in Berkeley has their own specific needs. And I feel like if we all came together with our CERTs, that it's like, okay, well, we have South Berkeley CERT over there, they may have created their own little thing over there, their own little group. And then maybe they can come together and say, hey, let's spend a weekend up in North Berkeley where we can all work together and do some fire fuel chipper work. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think there's some real possibilities here. But I don't know whether this is at the supervisorial level or at the CERT level or at the fire department level. I just don't know how to approach this.
I think it has to be a mixture of all of the above. See, when we have strong leadership from the mayor's position or even the city manager position, these things can be done easily or be, how do I put it, swayed away from. But if we have the local neighborhood associations pushing upwards, if we try to make that horizontal figure in which firefighters come together, CERT trainers come together, and the neighborhoods are really what drives it forward, I think it is possible. And regardless of whatever happens in the election, as long as we have those connections between the people themselves, not necessarily those in power. We can start doing this as soon as possible. We don't need permission from the city. We need to mobilize the city, yes, because they have resources. But I think something you mentioned, Peter, is that you had nurses and physicians on your street. I wouldn't be able to know who's a nurse and physician without knocking on every door and seeing their occupation. But you've already started this process here in North Berkeley, and we can take that model citywide even.
Right, and I've actually been surprised. We were doing one of our scenarios, which we do every April and October, although we were more enthusiastic at the beginning than we are now. And we had 5 scenarios. I was supposed to, as the fire captain, I was supposed to go along and identify potential fires. And this bunch of people from the 1800 block of our street were coming down, and they said, "What's going on?" And they'd never heard of CERT. And so we told them, and they said, "Oh, good, if there's an earthquake, we'll just come down to your block." And we said, "No, you won't, because the $3,000 of equipment that Berkeley gave us in our own cash is for us." And so, you know, we weren't doing that to be mean, but we wanted to empower them. But apparently there are all sorts of hostilities in their block that made it impossible to bring together a really cohesive CERT group like we have on our block. And actually, we've adopted 2 people from neighboring streets that intersect us, whose streets didn't want to have anything to do with it. And they're now part of our CERT. And one of them is a retired military guy with radio expertise who's brought fabulous radio training to our group. So, you know, I think there's both pitfalls and promises with this whole thing, and we need to overcome the pitfalls and expose more of the promises and work with them.
Very, very true. And I mean, since we're on a general discussion, I will say this. I feel that the city of Berkeley needs to prioritize emergency preparedness. This past weekend, I cannot tell you how many people were like, "What goes in a go bag? If I evacuate, where do I go? What do I do? Who do I talk to? I have small children. What do I do?" And I think it wasn't until the city of Berkeley was like, "Hey, y'all are going to have to evacuate by 4 o'clock." And then people started thinking late. Yeah. I think that going forward, the city of Berkeley needs to make emergency preparedness a #1 priority, because it is basically the safety of all of us. Because we are all a community, we are all neighbors, and we all depend on one another for our own safety, whether it's, you know, Bob across the street got his car broken into. Now we're all on the lookout to make, you know, it's on a multitude of different things. And I think when it comes to emergency preparedness, it's something that needs to be implemented like as soon as possible.
Yes.
So I'm sorry about that. Sorry. But I think that's something that needs to be brought to the front and made as an important issue, because it is, and it's our livelihoods on the line. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I would want to bring it back to the context of climate change that we're going to be seeing. I actually like to think in terms of climate disruption, because a lot of people think of climate change as just a smooth transition from a colder planet to a warmer planet. But if you read my chapter on ice in Climate Abandoned, that was the scariest chapter for me to read, to research and write, because I was using the work of Peter Wadhams, who's a famous Cambridge ice researcher, and he really should have been the one to write the chapter, but he didn't want to, so I did. And he says ice is like the flywheel on a car. It's what keeps the stability in place. And when the polar and Greenland ice is gone, the climate of Earth is going to be extremely chaotic, leading to years where agriculture is not possible. And without adequate preparation and storage of food, you're going to have famine and food riots. You're going to have increased wildfires. I mean, we already know that California's wildfires are way out of control compared to where they were, and that hurricanes are impacting the Gulf Coast more frequently. So resilience as a community is going to depend upon listening to the scientists and anticipating the social impacts of scientifically demonstrable changes. So I completely agree with you, Ali, that, but I would simply add, we need to have it on a very solid scientific footing, which means more public education. We need education. We need educational forums about climate change and its impact on Berkeley. You know, it's not just something that happens in the South or elsewhere. It's happening right here.
I definitely agree with both of those points. Something that I've noticed in the city, I've been lucky enough to work with the Berkeley CERT to make sure that unhoused people have access to these resources, especially disaster preparedness guys, trying to really give them to the informed encampments already. But back in 2018, when the Paradise Fires was happening, I saw some shortfalls. For example, if no one had access to a telephone, they wouldn't be able to get AC alerts that could help mobilize them in times of a crisis.
Yes.
Likewise, the places in which were picked by the city of Berkeley, those were great places like the Ed Roberts campus, but widely inaccessible to people who have to either go on foot or who are blind, deaf, hard of seeing, and hard of walking and moving too. And so where is the transportation for those folks? I often think about the Berkeley Hills when that comes up, especially since those roadways are oftentimes one way. And if a car jams it, it's even more difficult for people to leave the area. And so those are some of the things I've seen that the city of Berkeley needs to improve upon. Another really difficult aspect of it is the coronavirus and just how much it's decimated our communication with one another, as well as the services that are offered. The fact that we can't, for the most part, have truly safe, interactive, and in-person meetings in which people are taught these skills, it makes it very much difficult for people who have trouble reading, who have trouble even accessing technology. There has to be services in place for them that is COVID prepared. And I think these intersections of disasters, natural disasters happening at the same time, we do need to really focus, like Ali said, the city of Berkeley needs to make emergency preparedness the #1 issue happening right now, because the future is unknown. And the more we're prepared, the more we can weather it.
Very true.
Absolutely.
My friend just texted me.
Okay, we're at 7 o'clock right now. Is there any final thoughts from either Ali or Peter?
Just that I'm very excited to be working with your team and hope I can continue to work with your team.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Peter. You've always been such a light in the neighborhood, and Aiden for always showing leadership when it's needed to. So I appreciate being on the team with all of you, and let's work together to make it our mission in 2021 to really push for emergency preparedness.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you everyone for being a part of this webinar, We Are Resilient. I want to give a special thanks for Peter Hess for his wonderful overview of what it takes to have a wild preparedness home and the issues. And I want to thank Ali for being so open to having this meeting and organizing within your community. These are the things that are so very important. My name is Aiden Hill. I'm a candidate for Berkeley Mayor. Early voting starts October 31st, Halloween, trick or treat, as well as ends on Election Day, November 3rd, 2020. This is brought to you by the campaign team to elect Aiden Hill as Berkeley Mayor. And I just want to recognize before we go that we are on unceded traditional Ohlone land. And we have a huge responsibility to make sure that the Ohlone people here come to the forefront of this environmentalism, because they're the ones that created such the great resources that we benefit from now, and they deserve a seat at the table in all instances. So I want to say thank you once again, and this has been a pleasure. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.